All right, so what we have today is we're going to work a little bit with some 3D clip art, just some models, and then take a look at how to create the toolpaths for the 3D object and how to add text or a V-carving onto that contoured shape. So what we're going to be working with is 3D toolpaths, importing clip art 3D toolpaths, a little bit on the V-carving, and the distortion tool is what we're going to be focusing on here. Go straight over into creating a new project. File. I'm going to just scale that up a little bit bigger than what we were, 12 by 12, and doing the, in this case, one or the other, as long as whatever you do here, remember to do the exact same thing at the machine, zeroing to the lower left. So the first thing we're going to do is put in some three-dimensional objects here. I did that through the clip art. And we have under objects and people, there were two items that I used. One was the graduation cap, just scrolling through and looking for it. There's this one here. So I'm just going to grab that and move it over onto our space, and then scrolling down, and we also have the book. Doing the same thing, bringing that over. So the first thing I'm going to take a look at is how the two of these are going to be combining and being able to resize it. So right now that hat, the cap is just, a little too big for the book, or the book is too small for the cap. So in this case, we have a bigger job size. So I am going to increase the size of that book. And we can tile and see both the 3D and the 2D at the same time by clicking our buttons here. I could click it horizontal or vertical. So depending on which way we want it, I'm just going to quickly show how to and what happens when we move over top of one another. It just kind of get merged in there together, which is not really what we want. We want to see it like kind of on top of one another. And what we're going to do with this is actually tilt that cap just a little bit to fit over top of the book. But before we get that far, we need to change the size of our 3D graphic. You can change the size of a 3D image just the same way that we would any two-dimensional object. Simply by clicking on it, and we can come over to the modeling or the drawing tab under transform vectors. We could set the object size to a specific size, or we could just use the control points here and drag that up bigger. So I'm going to just kind of make this as large as I can, and we can see in the 3D view it's scaling as well. I'm going to make this as large as I can and still have it fit on the material within margin of having space around the side. Once that is scaled, going to select on it, going to use the transform vectors. I'm just going to center it horizontally on the job. That just shifts to the right just a little bit. The next thing I want to do is get a placement of where we'd like to have this cap. And I am falling off the edge over here, so I either need to reduce the size of the book just a little bit to fit both. And then with the book selected and the cap selected, I'm going to center that, and it centers it both directions there. One thing that I'm seeing, I don't like the size of our material for our project, so I could always come back in and modify the size. Instead of 12, let's go 15 wide. This gives us a little bit more space to work with. When working in 3 dimensions with the objects here, we want to keep the job somewhat as small as possible to get more resolution and detail out of it. So I am going to move that cap just a little bit more onto the book itself. But we can see what's happening here, down here in the 3D. It's not what we have. I could add some height to this, but that's not what I'm looking for. We're going to get right back to this, and I don't want to increase the height because it's not really what we're after. We're just wanting to make it look like this cap is overlaying or laying on top of the book. So to do that, we're going to use the tilt and basically just kind of give it that appearance that the cap is tilted or laying on top of that. So to do that, we're going to go to the modeling tab, double clicking that cap, and then we have this tilt feature. And I'm going to set the anchor point of where it is going to rotate from top. And this angle, this line that we're dragging out here is the kind of the plane that is going to rotate about or rotate on. So kind of thinking in like real life, how would this lay on the book? So I'm going to think right about there and then come down, and we could change the degrees of tilt to this, and I'm going to guess 10 degrees. And there, that just kind of brought it up and tilted it just a little bit. And we could see by rotating this around, we have a little bit more height, and we can see this wedge-shaped pattern here. And just kind of tilted it around just a little bit to where it is looks like it's more or less laying on top of the book. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is create a toolpath for a 3D object, so we could take a look at what that is going to look like without the text yet, just so working at it separately. So once that is done, I'm just going to close our tab. And to create a 3D toolpath for this, I don't want to do it based on the overall model or overall project. Mainly, it's just a lot of time here. So I want to be able to contain the toolpaths for this within a boundary box. I am going to create a roughing toolpath for this because we do have some height that we're going to need. So I'm going to actually create two bounding boxes for one that is going to be used for the roughing and one that will be used for the finishing. So just to kind of get it all lined back up again, selecting both of those and centering it within the job. So to create the roughing boundary, I'm just going to simply come down here and draw a rectangle. So we will be able to use this rectangle similar to as we were to kind of pocket this out. And that's where the toolpaths are going to get contained. So when I go to clamp this on the machine, I could place some screws in the four corners and know that I'm not machining out in that area at all, but it is allowing all of this to get cleared out to be able to get to the depth. So the next bounding box that we need is one that is going to handle or contain the finishing toolpath. So for that, I don't want to waste the time with an 1/8 inch ball nose or a 16th ball nose surfacing way out there. It's just, pointless and a waste of time to do it. So I only want to contain the 3D toolpath within the area of the model itself. So we do have the option in the toolpathing to go only within the model, but I still like to have the vectors in the outline there. So I'm still going to do it based on a vector boundary. So we're going to create that vector boundary by going into the modeling tab, selecting the book, then the cap. So both are selected. With both being selected, we're going to come over and click the create a vector around the boundary, and clicking on that, we can now see that we have this vector shape around the 3D objects. So for creating the toolpaths here, the first thing we're going to do is create the roughing toolpath, and I like to usually calculate and create toolpaths in the order that I'm going to cut. So I'm going to do the roughing first, then the finishing. So to do the roughing toolpath, we're going to switch over to the Toolpath side by clicking the Switch to Toolpaths command. Then we have this roughing toolpath. To select there. And now we have the option of how is this job and model placed within the material. The overall thickness of the model is seen down here at almost 5/8 of an inch thick. This lighter gray or brown here, this is the thickness of the overall carving that we're going to be doing. So with this model being all the way to the top, when we're done cutting, we're going to have a gap of just 20 thousandths below the surface. So it's getting a little thin. Probably be okay with it, but I should probably have our material being a little bit thicker, and I could always go in and change the material thickness now if I want to, but I think we're going to be okay for that. But typically, you'd want to have this model not sitting quite at the top. You want a little bit of a space at the top, and the reason for that is if your material is lumber and it's got a slight cup to it, or in the center of this area where the book is at the low spot of your material, but you zeroed your machine or your z-axis over to another area or a higher spot. When we go to 3D carve this, we may not hit the material here. So having the model sit down into the material just a little bit will help ensure that you get complete coverage of your 3D toolpath. So for this case, I am just going to leave it straight to the top since we have limited material on the bottom. Going to select OK. Now we're in the roughing toolpath. Now I should mention that that screen that we just set there pops up one time to allow you to set the model thickness. And once that is set, it won't pop up again, but we are always able to get back to that. So for the roughing toolpath, we're going to base it on selected vectors. So I'm going to come over to the drawing side and select the rectangle, coming in and selecting the bit that we would use for our roughing. So I will probably go with, say, a 1/4 inch diameter ball nose for our roughing, and reset our speeds and feeds for a 3D toolpath. Normally, 2 dimensions, you're going to set X and Y at different values. And there is a certain limit to how fast we can plunge a spindle directly down into the material. But in this case, we are X, Y, and Z are all moving at the same time. And we're very unlikely that anything is going to plunge straight down. So we are able to have the Z axis to be a little higher feed rate. And the reason why I want to match them together is I always try to describe the feed rate and the plunge rate as if we were in a 3-legged race. So even though I may be teamed up with an Olympian sprinter that is able to do whatever fast, much faster than I am, just because he is my teammate and I am going to be tethered to his leg does not mean we're going to win the race. The only thing that it means is I'm going to slow him down. So that is what's happening here. If I have the plunge rate or the feed rate not at the same speed, one of the axes is going to slow the other one down. So by setting them at the same speed, we know we're going to work tandemly with one another. I am going to do it as a 3D raster, which is going to get the majority of the contours of the product. There are some cases where a Z-level roughing would be good. We're not going to really get into a whole lot on that right now, but the Z, after I select the bit, we could continue on. So the Z-level roughing basically just pockets out different layers of the material at a certain height, which in some cases it's good for that. But in this case, we're going to do it as a raster. And I'm also going to set a rastering allowance or a machining allowance. This is how close to the material we're going to allow our 1/4-inch roughing pass touch the actual surface of the model itself. So basically, this is how much we're going to be leaving for the finishing tool path to actually remove. So you want to make this number big enough to where the cutter is actually able to do some work, but yet small enough to where you're not going to break that bit. So I'm going to probably finish this off with a 1/8-inch ball nose. So I'm going to just say this to be an 0.6, just 60 thousandths for the machining allowance. And then I'm going to come down and it would give it a descriptive name. In this case, I'm going to have one 3D roughing toolpath for this project, so I'm going to understand what that is referring to. So click Calculate. All right, so it wants us to have a little smaller, but it is calculating. It's just telling us that we may have left too much. So there is our roughing toolpath, and I could see that it's looking like it's multiple layers. So we're going to take a look at that tool that I selected. And as if you noticed, it was a tool that I've never used before, at least within this version of on this computer. So it's looking like that's going to be taking way too long to machine. Just there's a ton of layers there. So we're going to take a look at the 3D roughing tool path again, selecting that, coming up here to select the tool, and we're going to take a look at the pass depth. Yeah, sure enough, there's 50 thousandths. That is not worth roughing at that. So a good roughing pass, it all depends on the material. Rule of thumb is no more than 1 1/2 times the diameter. So let's make that 3/8 of an inch. And this time we should see quite a few less lines here or layers in this. This blue isn't going to look as dense. So there we are. So we see 1, 2 layers that is going to make a total of 2 passes through this roughing pass. Another thing that we could also do to help speed this up, this is a roughing pass, so we don't need to have our step over as tight or as smooth as we might want if it was a finishing. But before we get into that, we're just going to take a look at the preview. And that actually looks pretty smooth. So to speed that up a little bit, we're going to come back in, selecting that tool. We're going to modify the step over. I'm going to just bring that step over up to 30% and come back down. Calculate for a bigger step over. And again, just reset the preview so we can see what this is going to look like previewed. It's not as clean. I got a lot more lines in there, but that's okay. That's what our finishing toolpath is going to be doing. And this also allows us to get the roughing completed a little bit faster. Now coming into, for the 3D finishing toolpath, we're going to select the vector, coming over to the finishing toolpath, setting it to be the selected vector, raster again, and coming straight down and clicking Calculate. So the 3D finishing toolpath then is only over top of the 3D model itself. Let's take a look and preview what this looks like. Preview the visible toolpath. And we can see that that is cleaned that up quite nicely there. So we are good with that. Now we're going to add some VCarving and text to this. So I'm going to jump over and kind of just maximize this so we can really just focus on the two-dimensional aspects of this. I'm going to come over to our version here just to grab some of the text that was already grabbed, drawn, being lazy about it, and then right-click, paste. I'm going to keep this off to the side for the moment while I grab information and text from. And again, this is a nice way, if you weren't already familiar, you could do copy and paste from one instance of Aspire to the other. That is good. The only other one that I would have grabbed is the Eastern Allowance here, but we have already modified that, so we're not going to use that. So we'll add new text for that one. So now for kind of placement of this, let's first start with the text creating the Eastern Allowance. It's going to go across the top here and see what we have to do and why we need the distortion tool that I mentioned at the beginning here. So I'm going to switch back to the drawing side and then come down to the drawing tools and just going to use the draw text. I'm going to enter in the text that we are looking for. And just going to drag that up into where I would want that text to be. And the center of the book is here. Bring that down until it lines up with the center of that book. And to get a better feel for where that is, you could always just use a line to draw a line from endpoint to midpoint to help distinguish or where that fold is. So before we add more text, we're going to focus a little bit on the understanding of how to VCarve just this one word right now. So for that, we're going to jump back over to the Toolpath side, and we're going to do a VCarving on this. So only selecting the text and coming here to select VCarve Toolpath, selecting the V bit that you would want to use. I'm going to go with the 90-degree bit, and I'm going to click Calculate. And for those that know already what's going to happen, you just saw me uncheck a box. Some of you might say, oh, no, wait, you need that button. But we're doing this to demonstrate what is really happening here. So we're going to select Calculate, and there it is. It is there, but we could kind of see it's up in the air. And if I preview it, it's like you might wonder why it is not there. So we'll reset this preview. And with the finishing toolpath for the VCarving selected, I'm going to preview that visible toolpath. And sure enough, there it is. It worked. But when we do the rest of the toolpaths, it just kind of wipes itself out. And what it is that VCarving is from the top of the material down. Some of you may say, well, change the start depth. The start depth is really used if you have pocketed out an area already, if you completely removed a flat area of material that is starting down a little bit more. So that's still a two-dimensional, which it will and may get some of the parts, but not all of them. So if we just, for instance, I'm going to change that start depth to be a 0.14. So I'm going to start down into the material 0.14. And again, I'm just doing this for demonstration, not what I would really do in the real project. But with that one selected and visible, I'm going to preview the visible toolpaths. And I can see that it did get some of it here, but missed it here. So it's still V-carving along the flat. So we want to be able to set this V-carving to flow and use the contour of the shape of our 3D as if it were flat. So we're going to use a project to 3D surface, or project our toolpath onto that surface. So to do that, we're going to use the V-carving toolpath, and we're going to come down here and select this option to project the toolpath onto the 3D model. So looking straight down at whatever height that model is, it is going to treat that location as if it was at the top of the material. And as you hover and move your mouse across the surface of a 3D object, the bottom, kind of the middle bottom right here, is giving us our X, Y, and the Z value. So we could get an idea how deep this model is. So it's going to contour to that shape. So I'm going to click Calculate. And now we will double click this again, because I do want to go back up and just reset our start depth to 0. Back down, selecting Calculate again, and preview our visible toolpath. So there it is. So it just kind of flowed right to the surface. I do have my preview toolpath preview set to a standard. If we want to see it a little bit higher quality, we could set it to be a little bit better, but it does take a little bit longer to set the preview, but we might be able to see a little bit more clarity of what's actually happening here. So we'll do this once just so we can see of what we see, and visually isn't necessarily how it's going to look when it's cut. It's just a resolution issue of the computer or what we have VCarve set to. So you can see that preview really changed the overall look of this, and it's not as muddied up as it did, but we could see it also took a lot longer to calculate and create those that preview. So for speed purposes, again, coming up into the preview, back to standard, and we're ready to continue on. So the first thing that we're going to take a look at is the distortion tool. So if this were a real book, and this was Eastern Allowance was printed on the book, this page is curved and curled. So that means that the text that is printed on that page would not just be a straight line text going across there. It would have a matching curve up and down around this. So we're going to take a look at two ways of creating that curve. For the top one, we're going to use the curve pattern of the top vector here, which kind of works for the top level, but not necessarily for everything. So don't get stuck in thinking this is how you have to do all of it or should do all of it. But we'll be able to take a look at both. So the first thing that I want to get just this top curve. I want to be able to separate it from the rest of the vectors. And to do that, I tend to use, as you see out here already, off space, out of white space or off of our material as a scratch pad. So I'm going to select that outer vector again to where I can move it. I'm not just going to move it because we still need to have that there for the 3D finishing toolpath. But if I hold the control key down as I move this, the control is saying also make a copy of this. So we could see that our original vector is still there, but it just duplicated and made a copy of that vector. And I did that to kind of get it off of the screen so I'm not getting myself confused from what vectors are associated with the 3D, and just so I don't cut and break apart the wrong vector. And now we're going to take a look at the node editing aspects of this. And I already see that it's doing okay, but not a great job of tracing this, but we could correct that in just a bit. So I'm going to break this apart simply by hovering over top of the node where I would like to cut it, selecting right click, right click and select cut. Come back over and try it on this right side again. It wasn't liking that. Just insert a new node here and try right clicking and cut. So now that allowed us to separate one from the other. So I'm done with that section, so I'm going to select it and hit delete. And I do want to have this smoothed up a little bit. You can see it's pretty jaggedy there. So to clean that up, we're going to use the, now I can't remember what it's called. I know where the icon is. So we're going to select it, kind of come out of node editing and just use the selection tool and off to the edit curves, I believe, fit curves to vector. So selecting that is going to kind of reduce the number of curves. And I want to change them not from arcs to a Bezier. We could click the preview to see what it previews as. You can see that gave us far less nodes, and it is going to give us a much smoother vector to be able to flow to. So now with that selected or created, I'm going to just bring that back over onto our 3D space and going to place it in the area of where I would like to have the bottom of this text flow. So we're going to now take a look at the distortion tool. And to do that, we're just going to simply select our text. Actually, we don't even have to, for the distortion tool, don't have to have anything pre-selected. Coming into distort selected objects. So we could do it by the bounding box, above curve, or between two curves. We're going to use the above curve. And to do that, we would select the text. Now it's saying it's an invalid selection, and the reason for that is we don't have another curve selected. So now we can see we're good to go. Going to select apply, and it just kind of distorted that to where it might be how it might be flowing on the page of a book. And it did stretch it out from the endpoint to the endpoint, completely stretch that out. Going to close that and just take a quick preview of what that is going to look like. But before we preview that, we have to recalculate that toolpath because the toolpath for that is still straight along. So to recalculate that, you could just click the recalculate button. I'm not going to do that in this case because we have some three-dimensional toolpaths that took a little bit of time to calculate. So to speed things up, just going to double-click the VCarving toolpath, come straight down to the bottom and click calculate. So it told me that no visible toolpath or no toolpaths were selected. The reason for that is since we used the distortion tool on this, it kind of separated that. So selecting that text now again and clicking calculate, and we will preview the visible toolpath. So we're on top of one another, but we could see how that now kind of flows more like what might be on the pages of this book. I do want to take that text and move it up to get it more closer to the top. And just to do that is really just simply selecting it. I'm going to use the up arrow to move it up on there. So there we go. Again, I modified that, the location, so we will have to recalculate the toolpath. And I will do a reset this time, and do a preview all toolpaths. And there we go. So one thing to also to think about while we're at this point is how would we finish such a project? We do have a roughing toolpath. So let's take a look at how these toolpaths are separately in the order that I might want to think about cutting these. I'm going to reset the preview. Only preview the roughing toolpath. And at this point, we might just go straight to the finishing. But I'm going to first take a look at what happens if we did the VCarving toolpath next. Preview visible toolpath. So it doesn't look, kind of looks ugly and, you know, not quite right, but that's okay. Remember, we allowed 60 thousandths here for our finishing toolpath. So imagine at this point now, you take a pause from actual cutting and you come in and you paint all of this area here. Then after that paint is all done and dry, we could come back in and do this finishing toolpath. And being painting here, we don't have to worry about how close to these letters. It could be a little bit sloppy. Still want to be a little bit clean with it, but you could be a little bit sloppy. And as long as you're using a material or wood that doesn't bleed as much, you might want to put some lacquers, you know, some sort of varnish over top of it first to help seal the wood from stopping it from bleeding out. But now if we ran the finishing toolpath, it kind of comes through and it would have removed and knocked off the paint that we were messy about and only left the paint in the untouched areas of that VCarving. So the next thing we want to take a look at is how to create let's put this text over on the left side. You could stretch and scale this out to best fit. One thing to think about is the placement of this hat or the cap there. So you can't have something up here like this. It's not going to quite work out. Having it a little bit lower, as long as that bit isn't going to collide with our 3D of the cap, we should be okay. So again, just to show and demonstrate the VCarving toolpath for this, we could still use that same VCarving toolpath, only with that open, you can see this is selected up here. Just going to select our newly drawn text and come down and calculate. So now, well, we can see that we've fallen off the edge of the pages here. That's not going to work. So it gives us a chance to relocate and move text around. And see, we have to move it to the left just a little bit. So selecting only the text on the left, bounce it over just a little bit, and I can see how, based on where the toolpath was, to how much more or how close it's going to be there, because I also don't want it to get too far over into this area here. I'm going to just bump it over just a little bit more and see how that looks. And preview, before we preview, we have to recalculate since we've moved that text. So a lot of what we're doing here is like really bouncing back and forth between toolpathing, previewing, recalculating, and getting the placement again. So it's a lot of jumping around and back and forth. So with that done and recalculated, let's go ahead and reset and preview all the toolpaths once more. All right, so it's looking okay as far as space, but we had the same issue that we had with the text here. So that's, if this was really printed on an open book, it would not appear as this text was going straight across. This side would appear to be a little bit lower, up a little higher here and a little bit lower down here. So we could do this and correct it. This time we're going to take a look at the distortion tool and use a different method for this. And still it's the same thing, only selecting what we want to modify or distort. Going to zoom up on our 2D only. And coming over to our distortion tool, we're going to do by an outer box and then selecting apply. So now this gives us nodes that we're able to control. So just to, I'm going to undo this just so we could see what happens. I could stretch that side out and we see how it just kind of gets distorted and stretches based on where that control node was. Control Z. We also have the same methods of creating nodes as we do with vectors. We see this clear little node here, so that means if you select and click, you're going to get a new node. Control Z a couple times there. I do want to have a node straight up on the bottom and top from both sides. So I'm just going to hover over top of that center and type the letter I for insert, and then I on the bottom. And now at this point, we're going to bump this down a little bit. Actually, I'm going to bump that down a little bit. And I don't want that node there. So I'm going to hover over top and select delete. Stretching it out over to where it's more in line with the edge of the book. And then these two nodes over here, I'm also going to pull down. I'm just simply using the arrows on the keyboard for this. Bump these ones over to the right just a little bit and maybe up. So it's almost kind of right, but we see we're straight, and straight. The page of this book is not straight. So what we're going to do is hover over top of this node here. I'm going to smooth that out and do the same thing with the bottom side. That now created this Bezier type of curve to where I could now select just these two control points and moving those down. We can see how it's kind of curving around, and might want to even take these two here and move those up. And this side here. And again, just going to smooth those out. So basically, you're just kind of trying to mimic what it would look like if these texts were laid out and how it visually appears on an open book laid the way this book is. So once that is set, coming back into the Toolpath side, close the distortion tool on the left, selecting and double clicking the VCarving. Now the same thing that happened this time as what happened up here. This text is no longer selected because it's basically been converted, and we can't edit it as text anymore. It's different. So with it selected, both of them selected, we're going to come down and click Calculate, Reset Preview, and preview all the toolpaths. That E has gotten a little close over there again. So again, it's just coming in and modifying what we want to do. Bump it over just a little bit, and I think we're going to be good with that. So the next thing we're going to do is bring our logo over and place it on the page. And we could distort it a little bit if we wanted to. And we could distort just the same way on two-dimensional objects like this as if it were text or anything distorts the same way. Now, but before we distort this, we're going to take a look at what the toolpath is going to look like. So for this one, I am going to separate it from the rest of the toolpaths just because we're going to do a little bit different here, I think. So we're going to play around with some start depth, or not start depths, from a flat depth. So selecting that text. And before I do a flat depth, I'm just going to simply click calculate. Before I do that, I'm going to give this a name of logo. And I will preview the visible toolpath. So it kind of looks all right, but I'm too deep. This area here, I'm not quite crazy about how it looks. So I want to kind of create a flat depth and limit the depth of this. So to do that, I'm going to double click on that logo toolpath, set a flat depth of, this is go down a 1/16 of an inch. And I am going to select a different cutter for this. And I should use, this VCarving is what we're using, and I'm going to use the area clearance tool. I'm going to select a different bit. I'm going to use a 1/16 inch end mill. I could clean this up. This is a logo that's telling me there's some open vectors in it. It's just ignoring them. But I reset the toolpath, and let's take a look at what this looks like. Oh, I did not reset the toolpath. So that looks a little bit better. For this, I don't think we really need to distort a whole lot on this one, mainly because it's just a distortion of the logo, which is modifying the look of the logo, and I don't think we're going to get great, effects by it other than having the logo look weird. So I'm going to leave that the way it is. The one final thing that I'm going to do is add 2020 across the bottom here. And going to do that simply by coming over to draw text, specifying the text that I want. I'm going to close. And it's going to scale that up. And right away, I already know, and we've already learned about distortion, and know that we can't have this straight the way it is. So I'm going to just jump right into our distortion tool. Bounding box. This side is going to have to be, insert some nodes into the center. Lower this side down a little bit. Also, this one a little bit more to the left. Now between these points, I'm just going to smooth the top and bottom nodes a little bit there. And notice I am keeping the top and bottom nodes together. I'm moving those at the same time because that is keeping the kind of the total distortion the same and keeping the ratio of the height of the text kind of proportional. Go to the all right, so now I am going to include this text within the VCarving of that Eastern Allowance. Going to double click on the VCarving, selecting our year, coming down and clicking calculate. And you see we have to shift the text off to the right just a little bit. So with only the text selected, moving it off to the right, coming down, and reset our preview. All right, so we're nearing the end. So I could give you a warning to start thinking of some questions that you might have for this. I see a mistake. So even though I previewed it and I did shift that over, it's still here. I get myself in trouble with that a lot, where I think I did it, where we did do it and corrected it within the model or within the job, but the text or the toolpath was never recalculated. So anytime you rechange the location of a drawn vector, remember to also go in and recalculate. Again, we will reset the preview, and this time we'll have it take a little bit longer because I want to see, since we're nearing the end of our design, going into, let's preview it this way, a little higher resolution, and preview all the toolpaths. All right, well, this is, rendering and doing its thing. I'm going to open it up for questions now. So please feel free to use the chat window, and you should now also have the ability to be able to unmute yourself and be able to speak up and ask the question, or give me some tips and tricks. There's probably people out there on here, 31 people, that know a little bit more about this 3D than I do. So VCarve Pro is capable of doing quite a bit of what we shown here. The tilting, I don't believe, can be done, which we saw by lifting this cap, but you are certainly able to bring in three-dimensional clip art. The STL, if it's a 3D STL file, VCarve only allows you to bring in one STL file, but if it's clip art, you could bring in multiple parts and combine them, and that's that. So the finishing toolpath, let's preview, I'll speak of it. What I typically do is go 10% of the bit diameter. So we're stepping over, 6 thousandths, I'm guessing. 68, no, 10 thousandths, sorry, with that finishing toolpath. The speed of both of them, X and Y, didn't pay attention to it, or 1/8" ball nose, but I'm going to assume that I've already set it up. I should have had this plunge rate to be the same, the diameter, and there's that 10%. So the finishing toolpath, we used the outer boundary selected, did a offset boundary of a 0.1, which means that it is going out beyond just a little bit, and doing a raster rather than a offset, and the raster is going left to right. Well, yeah, you're welcome about showing my mistakes. I don't think the mistakes I make are not always on purpose. But yeah, that it's always good to see mistakes. I've learned more from them. If it was not for mistakes, they would probably know nothing at all. So hopefully I answered the question about the 3D toolpath there. So if I didn't quite get that completely answered, go ahead and just ping me and remind me of that. So we can get a kind of a time estimate of this. I'm not sure what this is going to say, but if I know that roughing paths right now, if you hover over top of any one toolpath here, it does give you a little tip there of the total cutting time. I could tell you that's not right. It will cut a lot faster than that. The finishing toolpath will take a little bit longer. It's saying an hour. That might be closer to being correct timing. The VCarving should only take a minute or so. 5 minutes, it's too long. So the reason that this timing doesn't quite work out, and we could change that and some of the settings right here to how it is going to calculate time. Basically, for one, we have a rapid rate. This is how fast above, when we're not cutting, how fast the machine goes from one cut to the next. We also have this thing on our CNC machines that are called acceleration, deceleration. So even though we have a rapid rate set here of 100 inches per second, it does not necessarily mean we're ever going to reach that. And mathematically, Aspire and VCarve assumes that it's just an all-out go. This is how fast you move. And that's kind of what this scale factor is for, to help adjust that a little bit. So it kind of gives you an idea, but some experience with the machine, you can come back and look at this and the time here and actual cut time and start making note of what it is. Yeah, so there is reminding I'm not quite finished with the job. Gotten excited that we were able to preview something that kind of looked right, but we're still attached in. It's still part of the overall material. We want to be able to cut this out. So to do that, going to the 2D preview or the 2D view, selecting this outer vector, and kind of come into the profile toolpaths. And the total cut depth. Now, we could play around with this a little bit. Just point this out. And this is where a start depth could come in. So we've already removed, and we could see that we're down at -5.5. So we've already removed like, quarter of material in that roughing. So we could actually start down, well, actually a 1/2 inch. So our start depth could be that 5.5. So let's just view what that is. So going back into the profile, I'm going to start down at 0.55. Now the cut depth needs to be a difference of our start depth to our material. I can't remember what the material is, so I'm just going to simply type the letter Z for our material Z height. I'm going to go -0.55 and then equals. So we're going to cut down another 0.2, and I'm just going to add a 10,000th to that to make sure it goes all the way through the material. I want to cut on the outside with a 1/4 inch end mill. And add a ramp into the material and select calculate. I do get a warning here, and I'm okay. Just want to make sure that there's that 10,000ths, and we'll say okay. And now just do a preview of the visible toolpath. That cuts that out, and we can double click on our waste to remove. All right, well, thank you all for coming to visit with me, giving me something to do on a Thursday or a Tuesday.